TCU is taking the opposite approach of Texas Tech in the transfer portal.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I've been covering TCU athletics for the past 12 years. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're also available wherever you get your podcasts. We're brought to you today by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel, new customers at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. One $5 bet, win or lose, get you up to $200 in bonus bets. Texas Tech is making waves in the transfer portal. Really, they're doing more than that. They have the number one rated transfer portal class in the country at the moment. Not sure where they'll finish, but after this first portal window, that's where they're at. And this is funded mainly by Cody Campbell, who is a big-time donor. He's also very active. He's a very public figure. And he made a proclamation after the season was over that he was like, hey, I'm going to go find a team that can compete at the highest levels of college football. And they're largely doing that by attacking the transfer portal and finding players in need. They got a lot of the biggest names, maybe not huge names just on the surface or names that you would just recognize immediately. But as far as rankings go in the portal, they went and got Hunter Zambrano, who's an offensive lineman transferring over from Illinois State, has a lot of experience. Quentin Joyner, the running back from USC, Howard Sampson, the tackle from North Carolina that TCU had committed at one time last offseason that I thought they should go take a look at this year. Lee Hunter in the conference from UCF, big defensive tackle. They're trying to get better on the defensive line. Anthony Holmes, another interconference transfer, 6'2", 295 from Houston. Terrence Carter, big-time tight end from Louisiana. TCU did not see him in the bowl game, but he had over 600 yards receiving this year for the Raging Cajuns. The list goes on. I'm not excluding anyone. I'm just not going to list everybody. They got 17 total, and pretty much all of them fall under the same umbrella of impact players. People, these are not projects. These are people that are coming in right away. They're looking to win. And it's interesting to me because I feel like when we talk about TCU and what they've done in the portal so far, they've definitely added players. You've got 8 players signed right now that are enrolling and are going to get through the offseason program and then get ready for spring ball. And they're at positions of need. Jordan Dwyer on the outside at wide receiver, who had a huge year at Idaho this past year. Joseph Manjack, who's been very consistent contributor for Houston for the past couple of seasons. Ansel Denbu on the defensive line. Those are immediate impact guys for sure. Elijah Jackson, the corner from Washington, who played under DB coach Julius Juice Brown in the past. So those are dudes that you think they're going to walk in right away and potentially play. There's also some more guys that I would say kind of fall under that project category. Kamorian Pimpton at tight end and Kylan Jackson at LSU, who are young players that didn't play a lot down in Baton Rouge and are looking for a change of scenery. Pimpton's a tight end, Jackson is a safety. And then you've got Rashid Jackson on the offensive line, the tackle, who is coming off a season where he played a lot of snaps at Incarnate Word, and he's trying to get acclimated to this team. But overall, you've got a little bit of a mix. But they've been pretty quiet about who they've added. I think Dwyer's the biggest name. He's maybe the biggest impact player coming over from that transfer portal class. But they've been just pretty easygoing about the way they've added players. And I think this season, what they're banking on, or what they would sell you on, hey, this is what we're doing, is they're banking a continuity where Texas Tech is trying to bring in – they're not doing a wholesale roster change, but they're bringing in a lot of new faces, and they're trying to just baseline improve the talent level, but also get more dudes that are ready to rock and roll right away. TCU, I think the story of their first portal window, it's almost more about who they retained than who they're bringing in. So – any big-time starter that entered the portal briefly came back. They got Jamel Johnson, who entered briefly at safety, and then they gave him come back. James Brockermeyer was the big loss. Started at center this past year. I feel like in a perfect world they wanted to keep him around, but he decided he's going to move on. He goes to Miami, and now they slide Colton Deary over from guard to center itself. all the other players that left, I mean, Richard Toney transferred in from Nevada this past offseason and didn't play a whole lot. Kylan Salter, exciting young player, but hadn't seen the field. JoJo Earl, Shadrack Banks, Julian Knox, Dominic Johnson. Cam Cook was their starting running back, but it seemed like they had sort of made peace with the fact that he probably wasn't going to be the guy this upcoming year. And then Haas Haney was a huge headline because he was at the time the guy who was supposed to kind of carry the torch and be the dude moving forward at the quarterback position when Josh Hoover's career ended. And now Adam Schobel comes into that role, and Haas is going to go to Oklahoma State and try to be a starter there. But there hasn't been like a major staff change. You lost your inside wide receivers coach. He's going to Oklahoma State, but you're keeping both coordinators. You're in the second season of Andy Avalos calling plays on defense, third season of Kendall Browse calling plays on offense, returning quarterback, a number of players returning on defense, a running back room that's unproven, but you have returning players there. And Texas Tech's on a different direction. They're spending a lot of money. They are, again, not really trying to completely overchange the roster, but immediately increase the talent and plug the holes that they have. And they have a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. And it's interesting to me because both teams were 8-4 in the regular season. TCU won the game in Fort Worth by 1 point in a big-time comeback. For Tech, I think that's the equivalent of TCU blowing that lead against UCF. That's probably one that they look at and they say, how do we lose that game? If we could have found a way to hold on, we're at 9 wins. It's not a completely different season, but you know what I mean. You feel better about the year. At the time that happened, that was a huge win for Sonny Dykes. Was it a little fluky? Maybe. I mean, comebacks are comebacks. But for a lot of that game, Tech, because of the way they played and because of some self-inflicted wounds that TCU had, they were in control. And then it totally flipped in the second half, and specifically, in the fourth quarter of that ball game. At the time, though, McGuire and Dykes were both kind of under a lot of pressure. And I really don't think, unless things completely bottomed out, they would have let Sonny go. Now, in hindsight, it's kind of crazy to think about it because Jeremiah Denati leaves almost as soon as the season was over, the regular season at least. And so what would his thought process have been? He probably would have been like, I don't really want to make a transition like that if I'm looking for other jobs. But Joey was under a lot of pressure, and that loss was a big loss for them. Now they ended up bouncing back, and they beat Iowa State. They closed the season strong. They lose their bowl game to Arkansas. But overall, both teams, I think, are kind of in similar places. They feel like they've showed a proof of concept this past year, that they're trying to build something. And now they're going about team building a different way. I saw Pete Thamel say on the Pat McAfee show yesterday. Now, Carson Beck hit the transfer portal. He's leaving Georgia. He ended up at Miami, according to reports. Like right before I started recording the show, those reports started coming down. But Thamel was on McAfee's show, and he said, I'm hearing Miami's a big player here, but I'm also hearing Tech's making a big push for a starting quarterback. Which, I mean, Baron Morton's there. Will Hammond is a young, exciting player. That would be kind of bizarre, but I think it speaks to their philosophy right now is we're just going to add as much talent as possible, set a competitive roster, and see what happens. See who wins these jobs. Where TCU, we'll see some roster churn in the spring. But to this point, they've done a good job of keeping all of their impact guys for the most part. And I will say, I feel like we talked a lot this season about, okay, what is it that Sonny does well? He's not a play caller anymore on offense. He's not super involved in the defense. So what is the thing that he kind of hangs his hat on? Every coach has the ideals and the pillars that they want to build their program around. And to me, I think it's the fact that he is, and I can already see Vince, but my friend Vince getting ready to type, and I love it. I love his opinions. To me, it's setting a culture where people feel comfortable and there's some loyalty there. I mean, it's not foolproof. I know a lot of you are thinking, well, what about Dominic Williams? Yeah, that was a huge loss. It was. But if everything we hear is true about TCU and their NIL, it appears that their strategy and the way they spend, a lot of it is focused on, hey, let's keep guys in-house. And you lose some dudes with tampering. You lose James Brockemeyer. You lose Dominic Williams. It would have been nice to have him this year, right? But for the most part, they've kept these rosters intact. And I think that speaks to the monetary aspect of it, sure, but it also does speak to Sonny and his ability to kind of make a working environment where people feel comfortable with what they're doing and they have a sense of loyalty to the program. That being said, for both programs, there's a lot of pressure in this year, and we'll get a determination on who's right and who's maybe approaching this the right way in 2025. When we come back, who are you rooting for in the college football playoff? We're down to the nitty-gritty here. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Horned Frogs. Your team every day. It's that time of year, man. Nobody loves doing it, but you're getting all those tax documents. You're trying to figure out, okay, do I want to do this myself? How do I want to approach it? This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. Taxes do not need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with the right TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers, no more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax Experts gives you taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates are only on the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. So we got one team in the national championship game. As the time I'm recording this, Notre Dame has defeated Penn State. They get a victory over the Nittany Lions in a good ball game. Notre Dame hit a field goal basically at the buzzer to win that game 27-24. Defensive struggle through the first half. It saw some offensive fireworks in the second half, and Marcus Freeman's done a heck of a job there, man. I mean, Brian Kelly, he's a good coach, but those Notre Dame teams always looked outclassed when they got to this time of year. And I think they got a little fortunate with the bracket, the way it broke. Obviously, Georgia having a backup quarterback made a big difference, but they go out and beat a Penn State team that has really come on strong as the year's gone on. They got NFL talent there. And now they'll play the winner of Texas and Ohio State, which will play not in a snowy environment because they'll be in the dome of AT&T Stadium, but in a snowy town of Arlington. And I know the Metroplex has been hit hard by that winter storm. We just got rain a little bit further down south here, unfortunately, but I hope you guys are enjoying that winter wonderland that you had briefly, as it'll get above freezing here in a couple days. But Texas, Ohio State. And what I wanted to know, who are you rooting for? And this can be a personal thing, but I also want to talk about who do you think it would be best for TCU's what's in TCU's best interest, the winner? Like, which winner would make TCU look the best? And honestly, there's no natural ties here. They haven't played any of these teams. There's nobody in the Big 12 that we can continue to root for. I think the answer is, as much as it pains me to say this, because I don't root for Texas. I don't like Texas. Sorry to any of those of you that, have those allegiances, but I don't like the Texas Longhorns. Never have. When I was watching the first playoff game, that Penn State SMU game, And I was like, James Franklin needs to save us from our national nightmare. And somebody hit me up and they're like, you have to root for SMU because right now it's just a Big Ten SEC invitational. And we need to make sure that the ACC and the Big 12 get representation moving forward. And I was like, listen, man, I will never root for the SMU Mustangs. I'm sorry. That's not something I'm going to do. I get it. It's logical. I'm in the same headspace with Texas. But I will say this. I mean, I'm super impressed with what they've done. Obviously, Steve Sarkisian has figured out how to make that thing work. Quinn Ewers has been fantastic. Matthew Golden, the transfer from Houston, has been great. But honestly, I'm burying the lead here because the story about the Texas Longhorns is their defense. They are big. They are physical. They are fast. And Arizona State eventually got going, but they had them locked up for the first few quarters of that ballgame. So I think what's in TCU's best interest and the Big 12 is if Texas won it all, and especially if they won it all convincingly over the next week or so, because Arizona State had them on the ropes. I mean, I thought they had that game won in overtime on 4th and 13. Just couldn't execute and get it done. But they went toe-to-toe with that Texas team. And they just sort of hung around long enough. They took some punches early. They hung around long enough. Cam Scadaboo eventually got going. And arguably they should have won that game. And so if they take care of – and Ohio State's super talented. Now they're playing well right now. But if they take care of Ohio State and Notre Dame, then hopefully that's a good look for the Big 12. I did an episode a few weeks ago now, maybe a week and a half ago. I don't know. The holidays have messed up my dates and all that. But I did an episode recently about how the BYU not even really being considered as a snub is bad news for the league, because BYU got left out. And their losses, I mean, they were some bad losses. They lost to Kansas, but Kansas was on fire at that time. And they lost to Arizona State, who was in the playoff and equipped themselves really well in that playoff game. But they have a win over SMU. They had multiple wins, obviously, over Big 12 opponents. And there was nobody pounding the table like BYU should have been in. There was plenty of, well, you got to let 3-loss Ole Miss or 3-loss Alabama, South Carolina in there. But there was nobody that was saying, wait, why did BYU not get a second look with that resume? And so that was disturbing to me because I just feel like the Big 12 is not on the national radar right now. Like Arizona State, who ended up being the best team in the league, I think it was that Arizona State BYU game where Desmond Howard was sitting there on the desk and they were picking it on College Game Day. He was like, why are we picking this game? I thought we were picking big games. Yikes, man. So I would hope that if Texas won it all, people would look at that and say, hey, look who gave them their best shot, Arizona. Maybe let's take a closer look at that league. Because while all the parity is a lot of fun, it's hard to sell it right now. It's hard to sell people on, no, it's just a lot of good teams that are very close together talent-wise, and it's just a few plays here and there they're separating them. Man, that win would have been big for this league. If they could have taken down Texas, that would have been massive. Of course, I say that. TCU beat Michigan, and it's like people forgot about it. And I know part of that is their own doing because of what happened against Georgia. But that felt like a huge moment for the league and for the program. And then it just quickly got upended. But I want to know from you, whether it's personal, who you're rooting for, or it's just what you think is best for TCU and the Big 12 at large. Who do you want to win this national title game? Or are you just a total nihilist and you're like, I hope nobody wins? That's fine too. Hit me up in the YouTube comments. You can also hit me up on Twitter or X at SimcockSteven. Game tonight and then the national championship game soon. The playoff games haven't always been compelling, but I have been impressed with how seamlessly it's all been pulled off. I guess I shouldn't be surprised because putting on events is what these TV networks do, along with the NCAA, and the playoff committee itself. But I have been pleasantly surprised at just how well it's gone in year one. And I mean, I think we're eventually talking about expanding even more, even though people want to try to limit it because of some of these uncompetitive games. We'll come back and wrap things up for the week here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. FanDuel, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with one of our great sponsors, FanDuel. Right now, you can go to FanDuel.com or jump on the FanDuel app. One $5 bet, win or lose, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Again, new customers, FanDuel.com, FanDuel app, just one $5 bet. You hit that bet, you get up to $200 in bonus bets. They make it easy for you at FanDuel. Give it a try today. You love sports. You're obsessed with it. Why not try to make a little money off of it? FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. Give it a go today. Hoops-wise, TCU men's basketball playing BYU at home. 1 o'clock tip on Saturday. And all the home games are big for TCU hoops moving forward, especially for the men, because you got to find a way to scratch and claw for 8 to 10 wins and hope that maybe that gets you enough to get to the postseason. But an opportunity against BYU team that's also kind of off to a rough start. Frogs 1-2 in conference play so far. The women play Texas Tech. They're coming off a win against Kansas. I believe that Tech game is in Lubbock at 6 o'clock. This stretch of games for the ladies that's coming up will tell a lot about who this team is. They've won all their games. They haven't always been comfortable, but they've won all their conference games so far. They play UCF, who they handled well in the first contest, but then Utah, who's number 22 in the country, Oklahoma State, who's right on the cusp of being ranked, Baylor, who is in the same way, right there, getting votes in the polls, and they haven't beaten Baylor since like the 90s in women's hoops. Iowa State, who is ranked preseason and has kind of fallen out of that, and then K-State, number 12 team in the country. So a gauntlet here over the next few weeks where we're going to find out more about this team and if they truly are like a Big 12 title contender and a national contender. They've certainly looked that way at times. I think they've struggled to put teams away early in conference play, but hopefully that gets better as the year goes on. I did a show Thursday about Adam Schobel, young TCU quarterback who's enrolling early, and he'll be, he's the future of the program at that position. And so I talked about the importance of, hey, you got to make sure that he knows what the plan is, that he understands what you want him to do, what you're trying to do with him as a quarterback. A couple of you chimed in. Jacob said, agree, you need to have a plan for Schobel. He's a big talent. He can be like the next Jared Goff under Sonny. You got to keep him. Jared Goff's an interesting comp. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see him just finish out his career here, obviously. And that starts with making sure he knows that he's valued and that they have, a vision for what they want him to do. Vince Pryor says communication is key. My concern is Sonny may be a part of TCU lore for the wrong reason. And then he talked about Haas's family leaving and Haas and his family making the decision to leave after 1 year. Yeah, it's tough to keep people around, man. Communication is key. I think that's going to be a big part of it. The advantage they have here is it's pretty clear that Josh is going to be the guy for the foreseeable future. And so they have that. I mean, they know that. He knows that. And they can be like, all right, this is where we're at now. We're going to take the time to develop you and turn you into a real deal player. Tommy Fisher says it's hard to keep a stud QB around. If you look at the team in the playoffs, how many started their school? Maybe one. Drew Aller. That tells me the importance of picking a proven quarterback from the portal is a real thing. There's only so many Power 4 starters. That's fair. I would say, the Quinn Ewers thing was weird because he went to Ohio State. He forego his senior season to go to Ohio State. And he was only there for a year, and then he transferred to Texas. And from what I heard about that situation, there were some weird things going on. I don't think he was ever going to stay at Ohio State. But I see your point. To me, like, Quinn is a Texas – I know he wasn't there from high school, but he's a homegrown Texas guy. But I get where you're coming from. Yes, it's difficult to keep these players around, and a lot of the great starters in the league now or in the conference now in the nation are transfer guys. So you have to account for that for sure. I also talked about the offensive line. Richard Berry says at some point you have to let these guys grow up. And I get that. I get that's the kind of push and pull here. You want to have proven talent in the portal, but you also recruit these high school players, and you have to have them as contributors. So it's going to be a big year for that. And then someone asked me if I could do an episode on TCU's schedule next year. Yeah, I'll try to get that done next week. It is a tough schedule. You're right. And we can talk about some of those games that are coming up and how difficult it's going to be for the Frogs. We'll be back next week. Thank you for joining us now. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day.